My name is Denise. I'm 57 years old, and I've spent most of my life putting everyone else's needs before my own. I sat there watching the water drip off the edge of the restaurant's patio umbrella, each drop landing on my untouched slice of chocolate cake. The waitress had already cleared away the other 7 place settings an hour ago. She kept glancing at me with that look people give you when they're trying to decide if they should call someone. The reservation had been for 8 people. 8. My daughter, Michelle, my son, Robert, my sister, Carmen, my best friend, Joyce, and 4 other people I thought cared enough to show up for my birthday dinner. The hostess had even decorated the table with balloons and those little metallic confetti pieces that stick to everything. I pulled my phone out again, checking for the dozenth time. No new messages. The last text was from Michelle at 4:30, 2.5 hours ago. Running late, Mom. Start without me. That was it. No explanation, no apology, no estimated time of arrival. Just start without me, like I was supposed to celebrate turning 57 by myself in a crowded restaurant, while families at other tables looked at me with pity. The worst part wasn't even the loneliness. It was the humiliation. I'd spent 3 weeks planning this dinner, calling everyone, making sure they could come, picking a restaurant that had something for everyone's dietary restrictions. I'd even bought a new dress for the occasion, a burgundy wrap dress that Michelle had said looked nice on me when I tried it on at the store last month. I should have known something was wrong when Robert called yesterday to confirm the time. Robert never confirmed anything. He just showed up to places 20 minutes late with some excuse about traffic or work or his kids needing something, but yesterday he'd been almost formal on the phone. So dinner's at 6, right, Mom? Yes, honey, 6 o'clock at Carlino's. You remember where that is? Yeah, I remember. And it's just family, right? You, me, Michelle, Aunt Carmen. I'd felt a little prick of annoyance then. And Joyce. You know Joyce has been like family to me for 20 years. Right, Joyce. There had been a pause. Okay, well, I'll see you tomorrow. He'd hung up before I could ask why he sounded so strange. I should have paid attention to that feeling in my stomach, the one that told me something wasn't right. The waitress came by again. Her name tag said, Ashley. She couldn't have been more than 25, all bright eyes and genuine concern. Ma'am, can I get you anything else? Maybe some coffee? I looked up at her and managed to smile. I think I'm okay, sweetie. Just waiting for my family. Ashley glanced at her watch. It was nearly 8:30. Of course. Take your time. But I could see it in her eyes. The shift was probably ending soon, and she was wondering when the sad lady at table 12 was going to stop pretending people were coming and just go home. My phone buzzed. For a second, my heart jumped. Maybe it was Michelle. Maybe they were all coming after all. Maybe there was some explanation that would make this all make sense. It was a text from Joyce. Denise, I am so sorry. Something came up with my mom. Hope you're having a wonderful birthday dinner with the kids. Something came up with her mom. Joyce's mother had been dead for 6 years. I set the phone down and stared at the rain. It was coming down harder now, drumming against the restaurant windows like it was angry about something. The parking lot was turning into a series of puddles that reflected the neon signs from the businesses across the street. A couple at the table next to me was celebrating an anniversary. 45 years, I'd overheard them tell their server. The woman kept reaching across the table to touch her husband's hand, and he'd smile and squeeze her fingers before going back to his salmon. They'd probably had birthday dinners with their children for decades, probably never sat alone in a restaurant, watching their cake get soggy from rain that was somehow finding its way under the umbrella. I tried to remember when things had started to change with my kids. When had I become someone they made excuses to avoid, instead of someone they wanted to spend time with? Was it after their father died 5 years ago? Was it when I sold the house and moved to the smaller apartment? Was it when I started dating again, briefly, and they made it clear they disapproved? Or maybe it was earlier than that. Maybe it was when they got so busy with their own lives that calling their mother felt like a chore instead of something they wanted to do. Michelle had 2 kids now, 7 and 9, and Robert had just started a new job that required a lot of travel. They had responsibilities. I understood that. But it was my birthday, 57 years on this planet, and I couldn't get 4 people to sit with me for 2 hours to eat dinner and pretend to care about another year of my life passing by. I thought about my own mother, dead now for 15 years. She'd always said that the hardest part about getting older wasn't the aching joints, or the gray hair, or the way store clerks called you ma'am without really seeing you. It was the way people acted like your time was less valuable because you had fewer years left of it. Your children will understand when they're older, she used to say, when they see how fast it all goes. But my children were older now. Michelle was 32, Robert was 29, old enough to understand that birthday dinners mattered. Old enough to know that showing up for people was part of loving them. The rain was getting in my wine glass now. I'd ordered a bottle of Pinot Grigio, thinking we'd share it. Now it was mostly full, and what I had drunk was mixing with rainwater and tasting like disappointment. Ashley appeared again, this time with an umbrella. "Ma'am, I hate to ask, but we're going to need to move you inside. The rain's getting pretty bad out here." I looked around. The patio was empty now, except for me. Everyone else had fled inside or gone home entirely. I was the only person stubborn enough or pathetic enough to sit in the rain protecting an empty table and a ruined cake. "Of course," I said, standing up. "I should probably head home anyway." "Are you sure? We could set you up inside. Maybe your family is just running really late." I gathered my purse and my phone. The wrap dress was damp now, clinging to my skin in an unflattering way. "They're not coming." Ashley looked like she wanted to say something else, something comforting or encouraging. But what could she say? That families were complicated? That maybe they had a good reason? We both knew this wasn't about traffic or work emergencies or sudden illnesses. This was about the fact that my own children had decided I wasn't worth 2 hours of their time on my birthday. Inside the restaurant, the lights seemed too bright, and the chatter from other tables too loud. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror by the hostess stand. My carefully done hair was frizzing from the humidity, and my mascara had smudged slightly. I looked exactly like what I was, a middle-aged woman who'd been stood up by her own family. The hostess, a different woman than the one who'd seated me 3 hours ago, smiled that professional service industry smile. "How was everything tonight?" "Perfect." I lied, because what was the point of telling her the truth? I paid the bill, left Ashley a generous tip because she'd been kind to me when she didn't have to be, and walked out into the parking lot. The rain hit me immediately, soaking through my dress in seconds. I'd parked far away because I'd expected the restaurant to be busy on a Friday night. Now, I had to walk across a flooded parking lot in heels, dodging puddles and trying to hold my purse over my head. By the time I reached my car, I was completely drenched. I sat in the driver's seat, shivering, and finally let myself cry. Not the gentle, dignified tears of disappointment, but the ugly, choking sobs of someone who'd just realized that the people she loved most had actively chosen to hurt her. I cried for the birthday dinner that never happened. I cried for the carefully planned guest list and the specially requested table by the window. I cried for the way Ashley had looked at me with pity and for the couple celebrating their anniversary while I celebrated nothing at all. But mostly I cried because I knew this wasn't really about one missed dinner. This was about the way my children had been pulling away from me for years, so gradually that I'd convinced myself it was normal. The shortened phone calls, the canceled plans, the way they'd started talking to me like I was an obligation rather than their mother. I started the car and drove home through the rain, windshield wipers struggling to keep up with the downpour. The radio was playing some old song from the 80s, something about love and loss that felt too on the nose for my current situation. My apartment building looked gray and depressing in the rain. I'd moved here after selling the house, thinking it would be easier to maintain, better for my budget. What I hadn't considered was how lonely it would feel to come home to an empty apartment after spending 30 years in a house full of people. I took the elevator to the third floor, my wet shoes squeaking against the linoleum. Mrs. Henderson from apartment 307 was checking her mail, and she looked up when she heard me coming. "Denise, how was your birthday dinner?" Mrs. Henderson was 78 and lived alone with a cat named Mr. Whiskers. We'd become friendly over the past 2 years, the kind of casual apartment building friendship where you chat in the laundry room and accept packages for each other. "It was lovely," I said, because admitting the truth felt like admitting defeat. Just what I wanted. She smiled. "That's wonderful, dear. Family time is so precious." I unlocked my apartment and went inside, leaving a trail of wet footprints across the hardwood floor. The silence felt heavy, pressing down on me like the weight of all the conversations that should have happened tonight but didn't. I changed out of the wet dress and into my pajamas, even though it was barely 9 o'clock. What was the point of staying dressed when there was nowhere to go and no one to see? I made myself a cup of tea and sat on the couch staring at my phone. Part of me wanted to call Michelle to demand an explanation, to ask her why she'd let me sit alone in a restaurant for 3 hours without even a phone call. To tell her how humiliating it had been, how hurt I was, how disappointed. But I didn't, because I was afraid of what she might say, afraid she might tell me that they'd planned this, that they'd all decided together not to come. Afraid she might say something I couldn't take back or forgive. Instead, I sat there in my quiet apartment, listening to the rain against the windows and wondering when I'd become the kind of person people made excuses to avoid. The apartment felt too small all of a sudden, too quiet, too empty, too much like a place where someone waited for things that never came. I thought about my mother again, about how she'd spent her last years in a similar apartment, making similar excuses for children who were too busy to visit. "They love you," she'd say when I asked why Robert hadn't called in 3 weeks or why Michelle always seemed to have other plans when I suggested getting together. "They're just living their lives." But loving someone wasn't supposed to mean taking them for granted. It wasn't supposed to mean leaving them alone on their birthday because showing up felt inconvenient. I picked up my phone again, scrolling through the contacts. There were dozens of names there, people I'd worked with over the years, neighbors, acquaintances. But how many of them would I feel comfortable calling right now? How many would actually want to hear from me? The truth was, my world had gotten smaller without me noticing. When the kids were young, I'd been surrounded by other parents, connected to my community through school events and soccer games and birthday parties. After the divorce, I'd maintained some of those friendships, but many had faded. When I'd moved to the apartment, I'd promised myself I'd make new friends, join groups, maybe take some classes. But it was hard to make friends when you were 57, harder than when you were 27 or 37, when shared circumstances naturally brought people together. Now most people my age already had their established circles, their long-term friendships, their family obligations. I'd tried, briefly. I'd joined a book club that met at the library, but the other women had known each other for years, and I'd felt like an outsider. I'd signed up for a cooking class, but it had been full of couples, and being the only single person there had made me feel more alone than staying home. So I'd settled into a routine. Work, grocery shopping, the occasional dinner with Joyce, Sunday phone calls with my children that grew shorter each week. It was a life, but it wasn't much of one. The rain was slowing down now, becoming a gentle patter instead of a downpour. I could hear Mrs. Henderson's television through the thin walls, some old movie with dramatic music and dialogue that carried across the hallway. I thought about calling Joyce, confronting her about the lie. Her mother hadn't come up with anything because her mother was dead. But what would be the point? She'd just make up another excuse. Or maybe she'd tell me the truth, that she'd found something better to do than have dinner with me on my birthday. The worst part was that I understood. I'd been that person too, the one who made excuses to avoid events that seemed boring or depressing. I'd begged off dinner parties and birthday celebrations when I was younger, when I'd thought I had unlimited time for such things. Maybe this was karma. Maybe this was the universe's way of showing me what it felt like to be on the other side of those excuses. But understanding didn't make it hurt less. If anything, it made it worse. Because it meant that my children and my best friend had looked at my birthday dinner and decided it fell into the category of boring obligation rather than meaningful connection. My phone rang. For a moment, I stared at it, heart racing. Maybe it was Michelle with an explanation. Maybe it was Robert with an apology. Maybe it was Joyce, ready to confess and ask for forgiveness. But the caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, probably a telemarketer or a wrong number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Hello? Is this Denise Williams? The voice was professional, female, unfamiliar. Yes, this is Denise. Ms. Williams, this is Jennifer Matthews, from Matthews, Stewart, Associates. I'm an attorney. I'm calling about your father. I felt my chest tighten. My father had abandoned us when I was 12, left one day to go to work, and never came home. My mother had eventually gotten divorced papers in the mail, but we'd never seen him again. He wasn't someone who called or sent birthday cards or Christmas presents. He was just gone. I'm sorry, I said, but I think you have the wrong number. My father. Your father, James Williams, passed away 3 weeks ago. The words hit me like cold water. Dead. The man who'd walked out of my life 35 years ago was dead, and someone was calling to tell me on my birthday, after the worst evening I'd had in years. I don't understand, I said. Why are you calling me? Miss Williams, your father left you something in his will. I sat there holding the phone, staring at the rain streaking down my window. The lawyer's words echoed in my head like they were coming from underwater. My father left me something. The same man who'd walked out when I was 12 and never looked back. I'm sorry, I said again. But there must be some mistake. James Williams was my father, yes, but he hasn't been part of my life for over 30 years. I don't even know where he went when he left. Jennifer Matthews cleared her throat. Ms. Williams, I understand this must be shocking. Your father lived in Arizona for the past 20 years. He worked as a mechanic and lived alone. He never remarried after your parents divorced. Arizona. All these years I'd imagined him starting a new family somewhere, replacing us with people he actually wanted to be around. But he'd been alone. Just like I was sitting here alone on my birthday. He left you his house. The lawyer continued. And there's something else. A letter. He asked that I read it to you over the phone and then mail you the original along with the deed and other paperwork. My hands were shaking. I set the phone on speaker and placed it on the coffee table so I wouldn't drop it. A letter? Yes. Would you like me to read it now? I looked around my small apartment. The silence that had felt so oppressive a few minutes ago now seemed like the only stable thing in my world. Everything else was shifting, changing, turning into something I didn't recognize. Yes, I whispered. Paper rustled on the other end of the line, and then Jennifer's voice changed, became more personal as she read someone else's words. Denise, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve forgiveness. When I left, I told myself it was because I wasn't good enough for you and your mother, that you'd be better off without me. The truth is, I was scared. Scared of being a father. Scared of being a husband. Scared of failing at the things that mattered most. I closed my eyes, trying to summon up any memory of his voice, but it had been too long. All I could remember was the sound of his boots on the front porch, the way he'd slam the screen door when he was frustrated, the silence he left behind. I followed your life from a distance. I know that sounds creepy, but in a town like Millerville, news travels. I knew when you graduated high school. I knew when you got married, when you had Michelle and Robert, when you got divorced. I was proud of you from afar, and I was ashamed of myself every single day. My breath caught. He'd known about my life. All these years of wondering if he even remembered he had a daughter, and he'd been keeping track. I never reached out because I figured I'd already done enough damage. What could I say? Sorry for abandoning you when you needed me most? Sorry for missing everything that mattered? Sorry for being a coward? Jennifer paused, and I could hear her taking a breath. This couldn't be easy for her either, reading a dead man's confession to a stranger. But now I'm dying, and I realize that protecting you from my guilt was just another act of selfishness. You deserved a father who stayed. You deserved explanations, apologies, birthday cards, graduation presents, someone to walk you down the aisle. I can't give you any of that now. The tears came suddenly, hot and angry, not just for the abandonment, but for the years of wondering, of making up stories about why he left, of believing it was somehow my fault. So I'm giving you the only thing I can, this house and the truth. I have cancer, and I'm not going to beat it. I've spent the last 6 months writing this letter and rewriting it, trying to find words that could somehow make up for 35 years of silence. There aren't any such words. I thought about my birthday dinner, about sitting alone while the people I loved found excuses not to show up. At least they were still alive. At least there was still a chance for them to change, to do better. My father had run out of chances. The house isn't much. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, needs a lot of work. But it's paid for, and it's in a nice area with good neighbors. Mrs. Garcia next door has been feeding me casseroles and checking on me for years. She reminds me of your mother in some ways. Jennifer cleared her throat again. There's more. Inside the house, in my bedroom closet, there's a box, a shoebox. It's full of things I collected over the years. Things about you. Newspaper clippings when you made the honor roll, a program from your wedding that someone left at the church, photos I bought from the school photographer. I know it's pathetic, but it made me feel like I was still your father in some small way. My stomach twisted. He'd been collecting pieces of my life like scraps, creating some sad shrine to the daughter he'd abandoned. Part of me felt sorry for him, and part of me was furious that he'd been watching from the shadows instead of just picking up the phone. I also kept every birthday card I never sent, every Christmas gift I never gave. They're all there, marked with the years. I know they don't mean anything now, but maybe they'll help you understand that not a day went by when I didn't think about you. The cruel irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, on a birthday where the people in my life couldn't be bothered to show up, learning that the person who'd hurt me most had been thinking about me every birthday for decades. Denise, I hope your life has been good. I hope you've been happy. I hope your children love you the way I should have loved you. And I hope that someday, maybe, you can think of me as someone who made terrible mistakes, but who never stopped loving his daughter, even if he was too broken to know how to show it. Jennifer's voice softened. The letter is signed, and there's a postscript. I wiped my eyes with the back of my hand. What does it say? I had a heart attack 2 weeks ago. Survived it, barely. The doctor says I might have weeks, not months. So I'm finally doing something right. I'm giving you what I can, and I'm not waiting until I'm brave enough or worthy enough or any of the other excuses I've made. Happy 57th birthday, Denise. I'm sorry I missed all the others. The silence that followed felt different than the one I'd been sitting in all evening. This wasn't the silence of abandonment. This was the silence of completion, of a circle finally closing after decades. Ms. Williams, are you still there? I'm here. My voice sounded strange, like it was coming from someone else. I've mailed you the original letter along with the deed and the keys. You should receive them by Tuesday. If you have any questions about the property or the estate, please don't hesitate to call me. What was he like? The question came out before I could stop it. When you met him, I mean. When he made the will. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. He was very sick, but also very determined. He'd written out everything by hand first, then had me type it up officially. He asked me to promise that I'd call you personally, not just send a letter. He said he'd spent too many years not communicating, and he didn't want his death to be another silence. After I hung up, I sat in my apartment surrounded by the same furniture, the same pictures, the same life I'd been living an hour ago. But everything felt different. The father who had been absent for 35 years had suddenly reappeared, not in person but in presence. He'd left me a house. He'd left me 35 years' worth of unsent birthday cards. And he'd known it was my birthday. I thought about Michelle and Robert, about Joyce, about all the people who couldn't spare 2 hours for dinner with me. They were all still alive, still reachable, still capable of picking up the phone or showing up or apologizing. But they'd chosen not to. My father, dying of cancer in Arizona, had done more for my birthday than any of them. The anger I'd been feeling toward my family was still there, but it was mixed now with something else. Perspective, maybe, or just exhaustion. I was 57 years old, and I was tired of waiting for people to love me the way I thought they should. I picked up my phone and scrolled to Michelle's number. For the first time in hours, I didn't hesitate before calling. She answered on the third ring. "Mom, is everything okay?" "No," I said. "It's not okay." There was a pause. I could hear voices in the background. Laughter. She was at a party, or a dinner, or somewhere with people who'd shown up when they said they would. "Mom, about tonight. My father died." "What? Grandpa Jim? But Mom, he's been gone for..." "I know how long he's been gone, Michelle. I got a call from his lawyer tonight. He left me his house." "Oh my God. Mom, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? Do you want me to come over?" The offer was automatic, the kind of thing you say when someone tells you about a death. But I could hear it in her voice, the reluctance, the hope that I'd say no. "Where were you tonight?" I asked. Another pause. "Mom, we can talk about that later. You just got terrible news." "Where were you tonight, Michelle?" A sigh. "We were at Robert's. Lisa made dinner, and the kids were playing with their cousins, and we lost track of time." "You lost track of time." "We're not good at birthdays, Mom. You know that. We never have been." The honesty was like a slap. At least, she wasn't making up elaborate excuses. "Your grandfather kept every birthday card he never sent me. 35 years worth. They're in a box in his house in Arizona." "Mom." "He was a terrible father. He abandoned his family and broke my mother's heart and left me to grow up wondering what I'd done wrong. But even he knew that birthdays mattered. I could hear Michelle crying softly on the other end. I'm sorry. We're sorry. We should have been there. Yes, you should have. We can make it up to you. We can have dinner tomorrow or next weekend whenever you want. That's not how it works, Michelle. You can't make up for not showing up by showing up later. That's not the same thing. She was quiet for a long time. Finally, she said, "What do you want us to do?" It was such a simple question, but it revealed everything. She was asking me to tell her how to love me, how to be my daughter, how to care. And the fact that she had to ask meant she didn't really want to figure it out on her own. I want you to think about what kind of relationship you want to have with me. I said, really think about it, because right now, it feels like I'm just an obligation to you. Something you have to manage and schedule around and make excuses about. That's not true. It is true. And maybe that's partly my fault. Maybe I made it too easy for you to take me for granted. Maybe I accepted too many excuses and asked for too little. I stood up and walked to the window. The rain had stopped, and the streetlights were reflecting in the puddles. Everything looked clean and washed, like the world had reset itself. I'm going to Arizona, I said. What? I'm going to see the house he left me. I'm going to read those birthday cards. I'm going to try to understand what happened between us, and maybe figure out how to make sure it doesn't happen again with you and Robert. Mom, you don't have to go alone. I could come with you. No. The word came out firmer than I'd intended. This is something I need to do by myself. We talked for a few more minutes, but the important conversation was over. When I hung up, I felt lighter somehow. Not happy, exactly, but clearer. Like I'd been wearing clothes that were too tight for years and had finally taken them off. I called my boss the next morning and took a week of vacation time. I'd been saving my days for Christmas, thinking maybe the kids would want to spend it with me. But that seemed less important now. The package from Jennifer Matthews arrived on Tuesday, just as she'd said it would. Inside was the letter, written in shaky handwriting that I didn't recognize but somehow knew. There was a house key on a ring with a small metal cactus and a deed that made me the legal owner of property I'd never seen. There was also a smaller envelope marked, "For the trip." Inside was $500 in cash and a note. "For gas and whatever else you need. I wish I could take you there myself. Love, Dad." I cried then. Really cried. For the first time since I was 12 and realized he wasn't coming back. Cried for the little girl who'd blamed herself. For the teenager who'd hardened her heart. For the adult who'd convinced herself she didn't need a father anyway. I flew to Phoenix on Thursday morning. The house was in a suburb called Surprise, which seemed fitting somehow. Everything about this week had been surprising. Mrs. Garcia met me at the door. She was probably 70, with kind eyes and hands that smelled like cumin and garlic. She'd been expecting me. "Your father talked about you all the time," she said, handing me a plate of homemade cookies. Especially at the end. "He was so proud of you." The house was small but tidy, exactly as he'd described. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1880s. But the yard was beautiful, full of desert plants and wind chimes that caught the afternoon breeze. I found the shoebox in his bedroom closet, right where he'd said it would be. It was full of me. Photos from school events that I'd forgotten about. A newspaper clipping from when I'd won an essay contest in high school. Programs from school plays I'd been in. And the cards. Dozens and dozens of birthday cards, Christmas cards, graduation cards, all addressed to me in his careful handwriting, all never sent. The birthday cards were the hardest to look at. each one carefully chosen, each one with a personal message written inside. Happy 16th birthday, sweetheart. I hope you're learning to drive and being careful, and that some boy hasn't broken your heart yet. Happy 21st, Denise. I wonder what you're studying in college, what you want to be when you grow up. I'm sorry I'm not there to find out. There were presents, too, still wrapped. A graduation watch for high school. A silver bracelet for my 21st birthday. A leather photo album for my wedding. Baby clothes for Michelle and Robert, still with the tags on. I sat on his bedroom floor and opened every card, read every message, unwrapped every gift. It was like getting 35 years of love all at once, and it was overwhelming and heartbreaking and healing all at the same time. The last card was marked 57th birthday. It was simple, just a picture of a sunset on the front. Inside, he'd written, "Happy birthday, my darling daughter. I hope you know how proud I am of the woman you've become. I hope you're surrounded by people who love you and appreciate you. I hope you're happy. You deserve all the happiness in the world. Forever your father, James." I called Michelle from his living room that evening. "Mom, how's Arizona?" "It's beautiful," I said. "Hot, but beautiful. Listen, I wanted to tell you something." "Okay." "Your grandfather wasn't a good father. He made terrible choices that hurt people, but he loved me. In his broken way, he loved me for 35 years from a distance because he thought that was better than trying and failing up close." Michelle was quiet. "I don't want that for us," I continued. "I don't want you to love me from a distance because it's easier than showing up. And I don't want to be so grateful for scraps of your attention that I never ask for what I really need." "What do you really need, Mom?" It was the first time she'd ever asked me that question. "I need you to show up," I said. "Not just physically, but emotionally. I need you to call, not because you feel guilty, but because you want to hear my voice. I need you to include me in your life, not just remember me when it's convenient." "I can do that." "I hope so. Because I'm 57 years old, and I don't want to spend my remaining birthdays alone. I don't want to be someone you make excuses about to your children." We talked for an hour. Really talked. Maybe for the first time in years. She told me about problems she'd been having at work, about how tired she was of juggling everything, about how guilty she felt for not being a better daughter, but how she didn't know how to change. I told her about the loneliness, about how small my world had become, about how much I missed being needed by the people I loved. By the time we hung up, something had shifted between us. Not fixed, exactly, but acknowledged. We had work to do, both of us. I stayed in Arizona for the rest of the week, sorting through my father's things, talking to Mrs. Garcia about what he'd been like, walking through the neighborhood where he'd spent his last years. I decided to keep the house, not to live in, but as a retreat. A place to come when I needed to remember that people are complicated, that love takes many forms, that it's never too late to try to do better. On my last day, I drove to the cemetery where he was buried. Mrs. Garcia had told me where it was. His grave was simple, just his name and dates and the words, "Beloved Father." I sat there in the desert sun and told him about Michelle's call, about how we were going to try to do better. I told him about Robert, who I was planning to visit on my way home. I told him about my life, the parts he'd missed, the woman I'd become despite his absence. And I forgave him. Not because what he did was okay, but because holding on to the anger was taking up space I needed for other things. When I got home, there was a voicemail from Robert, and one from Joyce, who wanted to apologize for lying about her mother, and one from Michelle, asking if I wanted to have lunch that weekend. My apartment looked the same, but it felt different. Less like a place where I waited for my life to happen, and more like a place where I lived. I put one of my father's photos on my refrigerator. It was a picture of me at my high school graduation, smiling and holding my diploma. I didn't remember him being there, but someone had taken the photo, and somehow, he'd gotten a copy. On the back, in his handwriting, it said, "My daughter, the graduate. I'm so proud." I was 57 years old. I'd spent my birthday alone and discovered a father I'd never really known. I'd learned that love wasn't always visible, that family was more complicated than showing up, that forgiveness was something you did for yourself as much as for other people. But mostly, I'd learned that it was never too late to ask for what you needed, never too late to set boundaries, never too late to stop accepting less than you deserved from the people who claimed to love you. My next birthday was still 11 months away, but I wasn't worried about spending it alone anymore. Because I'd finally learned the difference between being alone and being lonely, and I was determined never to be the latter again.